So today we're going to talk about the digital-only edition of the PlayStation 5 and whether or not we're headed towards a discless future on console. Now, of course, in this current generation, Microsoft made an attempt for a discless console with the release of the Xbox One S All-Digital Edition, also known as the Xbox One SAD Edition, and that console really was a sad attempt from Microsoft because it really didn't have any purpose. Because remember, the Xbox One All-Digital had the same price as the original Xbox One S, which was $249. So you can buy the All-Digital Xbox One S for $250, but you could also buy the one that actually has a disc tray for the exact same price. There was literally no incentive to get the discless Xbox One. But when we're talking about the next-gen consoles, I think that's going to change. I think Sony and Microsoft are both going to release discless consoles. I know Sony already confirmed it, and we already know that the PS5 is going to have two different versions at launch, one with a disc tray and one without one. And I'm pretty sure Microsoft's going to do the same thing. And there's two reasons why Sony and Microsoft would want to release versions of their consoles that do not have a disc tray. One reason, of course, is to cut costs. Removing the disc tray means one less component they have to assemble, which would significantly reduce manufacturing costs. And as we know with console manufacturers, they already sell their systems at a loss, so if they have an opportunity to cut costs, you know they're going to take it. Because Sony and Microsoft already lose money when you buy their console. But the reason why they sell those systems at a loss is because, yeah, you buy the console and Sony and Microsoft actually lose money, but they make most of that money back off of game sales. Which brings me to the second reason why they're selling discless consoles is because the physical market is viewed by Sony and Microsoft as a threat to their business model. And that's especially true when we're talking about used games, in which Sony and the game developers don't see a dime of that revenue. It all goes to the store or the individual person that sells that game to you used. Sony and Microsoft never see any of that money. And even when we're talking about new physical games, Sony and Microsoft just make so much more money off of digital sales because there's no middleman. GameStop, Walmart, whatever, they don't exist in a digital space. Which means that with digital game sales, Sony and Microsoft get a much bigger piece of the pie. So really, it's within the interest of Sony and Microsoft to completely eliminate the physical market because they just make so much more money off of digital sales. But it's not just about what the console manufacturers want. These discless consoles are also a response to changing consumer habits. Because over the past 10 years, year after year, the physical market has shrunk while the digital market has grown. And the reason is because physical media on consoles has lost all of its practical use. Because back in the day, that's how you played your games. You had to have a cartridge or a disc or whatever, because there was no alternative. You didn't really have good online infrastructure back in the 6th generation that could support a robust digital marketplace. You were barely able to even play games online back then. You had Xbox Live and you had the PS2, but we still had a long way to go before online gaming became really mainstream because the technology just wasn't as developed as it is now. But even when that technology was there, physical media continued to dominate the industry throughout most of the 7th generation, even though you had the PlayStation Store and the Xbox Live Marketplace. And that's because during most of the 7th generation, physical discs still had a practical use to them. There was a time where you can pop your disc in and get right to playing, but that kind of started to go away during the last couple years of the 7th generation as games became too big to fit on the Blu-ray discs. And by the 8th generation, physical media became completely useless. Because sure, you could save a little bit of space by installing a few gigabytes onto your disk and it can take away a little bit of strain from your hard drive, but you still had to install most of it into your hard drive. And at that point, you might as well buy a digital copy of your games because there really isn't much of a benefit in buying physical discs anymore. Because not only do you have to install the games in your hard drive anyway, so what's the practical difference? But if you choose to get a physical copy, you have to wait longer to play your game. You can't preload the game a week early like you can if you buy a digital copy because you have to wait until you actually have the disc in your hands, then pop it in, and then wait for it to install. So when we're talking about new releases, it's just much more convenient to get a digital copy because then you don't have to wait for the game to come in the mail or spend all night waiting in a line for the midnight release. Not to mention that digital copies can't get scratched, they can't get damaged. So for the average person, digital media is a lot more practical now. Especially now that you have single-player games like Spyro that require an internet connection in order to receive all the content in the game. So why the hell would anyone buy a physical disc? It's just so much more inconvenient. But on the other hand, if you release a discless console like Microsoft did with the Xbox One SAD and don't give any extra value to the consumer, they're just gonna go with the one that has more features, which includes a disc drive. If it's the same price, why bother getting the console that has less features while costing the exact same as the one that has all the features? That just made no sense, Microsoft doing that, but I think they learned their lesson. If they're going to release one with a disc and one without one, there's probably going to be a fairly significant price difference. Now, if it's only $50, that might not be enough to entice a lot of people. I think it needs to be $100. So they could price the discless PS5 at $450, while the one that has the disc drive would cost $550. That would be enough of a price difference for most people to want to buy the one without a disc because it's significantly cheaper. But if it's only $50, like if it's $450 versus $500, that might not be enough to entice a lot of people. But no matter what the price difference is, I would highly recommend anyone looking to get a next-gen console to really consider whether or not a discless console is a good value in the long term. Because sure, you may save $50, $100 in the short term, but having that physical option still there, it saves you so much more money over the years. Because if you get the console with no disc, you'll be missing out on the physical market where games are usually much cheaper than they ever will be on the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Store. Because that's the thing about the digital market on console compared to PC. On PC, you have so many options, but on console, the entire market is controlled by either Sony or Microsoft. So console gamers, do you really want to give up the only advantage that you have left over the PC? Because on PC, I can't trade games with my friends. My friends can't let me borrow games from them for a week and then I could give it back to them. Because on PC, the physical market is practically dead, and the few physical releases you do get are just collector's items. They have digital codes that you have to type in order to redeem your game, which is completely useless. But on console, you still have that freedom with the physical market. You still have that free exchange of games that just gives you so much more freedom on consoles than if you just gave up the entire physical market. That's great for Sony, Microsoft, and the publishers, but not great for the consumers. So I'd really think twice about getting the discless version, because you as a console gamer have a lot more to lose than gain in the long term. And that's exactly what the console manufacturers want. They want to see the physical market die, because they view the physical market as a huge financial liability. There's so much money on the table that they feel they're missing out on. And they're going to do everything they can to maximize their profits because they're corporations and that's what they do. But the thing is, if the physical market on console does die, that can have some serious negative implications for the console consumer. Because at least on PC, you already do have a check on the games market. Valve, Epic, Microsoft, they don't control the entire PC gaming marketplace. And that's a lot of the reason why games are so cheap on PC compared to digital games on console. And I would argue that the physical console market is even better than the PC marketplace. Because on PC, you have a lot of games out there that don't budge on price over the years. For example, you have Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which I took a look at, which is a 4-year-old game, and it still costs $60 on Steam. And it's the same thing for PlayStation Store and Xbox Store. $60. I even took a look at Black Ops 2 on the 360, and it still costs $50 digitally. But at GameStop, you can easily get those games used for $10. So if you eliminate the physical market, games are going to be a lot more expensive on console, because you'll be essentially giving Sony and Microsoft a full monopoly over the games market on Xbox and PlayStation. You can't borrow digital games from other people, you can't trade them with your friends, and you can't sell digital games you don't want to play anymore. You're stuck with it, whether you like it or not. And to me, that's just too much to give up. The physical market is very important to keep games as cheap as possible and to prevent Sony and Microsoft from fully controlling the games market. But the most important of them all is the actual preservation of the games themselves. Because if you completely eliminate the physical market, there will be a lot of games that you will never be able to play ever again because the license was revoked. And if the license expires, the game is no longer on sale in these digital marketplaces. But if a game gets a physical release, unless it's online only and the server shut down, the game will always be preserved in history. But without physical media, that preservation becomes so much harder. Because if the company pulls the game from sale because there's no more licensing or whatever the problem is, that's it. You can't access the game anymore. Because digital is your only option. But if you buy the physical game, the game will always exist no matter what happens. The company that made the game can shut down, we can be living in a zombie apocalypse, and the whole internet infrastructure will go down. It doesn't matter, that game will still exist because you still have the physical copy. I mean, it's very possible that in the not so distant future, the PlayStation 3 servers will be completely shut down, which means the PlayStation Store on PS3 will be inaccessible. Think of all the games released on the PS3 that were digital only, didn't even get a physical release, that will be lost forever if the PlayStation 3 servers do go down. And to me, that's a really scary thought. That entire pieces of work will be lost forever. It's almost like a destroyed piece of art or a burned book. It's just terrible to imagine. because you have a lot of talented developers that poured their heart and soul into a lot of these games, and to think that one day, new players will never be able to experience them, that's a very depressing future, but that's a future that's already going to happen no matter what. Because the thing is, not every game even has a physical release. Even with the physical market still being alive, very often publishers still choose to just not have a physical release and be digital only. And with millions of console players next gen, not even having a disc drive, we're definitely going to see a lot more of that. We're probably going to see a lot more AAA games that you will only be able to buy digitally. And it's very possible that the PlayStation 6 will not have physical media at all. And to me, that's a really scary future in video games. Because as a consumer, you're going to lose a lot of your rights, having less options in where you buy your games from, and games being more expensive as a result. But you'll also have games over the years that will be forever lost in history. So I think it's in the best interest for console players to hold on to physical media, because they have so much to lose if they don't.